All right, for this exam essay, we're going to be talking primarily about the senses, the physiology of the senses that we experience. So, smell, taste, sight, sound, specifically those senses. So, first, we're going to talk about the chemoreception of smell. So, how do we smell things? How does that all work at a physiological level? I'm going to draw a nose right here. And let's see, maybe like a little eye like this. And we got the brain up here. And in our nose, we have these neurons that are going to be sending messages to the brain about what we're smelling. So here you have this layer called the olfactory epithelial layer of these cells, kind of like a membrane. And then you have these neurons that have kind of these dendrites that extend past the olfactory layer. And that's where you have these particles from whatever you're smelling that are being sensed by the neurons and sending messages up to the brain. So these neurons we can refer to as olfactory receptor cells. And then we have our olfactory bulb. And what we're particularly interested in is how does this particle that is sensed by the dendrite trigger this sensation or this afferent pathway to tell the brain what we're smelling. So we're going to look specifically here. I'm going to kind of blow this up here, and we'll have a dendrite here. Coming up to our axon. And just like with anything else in physiology, in the membrane of this cell, we're going to look at some channels and what they do. So we're going to have, let's see, where am I going to draw this? I'll just draw it right here. We have a G protein here. Okay. This G protein is going to have some sort of ligand, something that will bind to it, and it will release, that will cause a release of an alpha subunit, which will then activate adenylyl cyclase, here. When adenylyl cyclase is activated, that causes an increase of cyclic AMP inside this neuron cell. And when you have the increase of cyclic AMP, that will cause a chemically gated channel to open, and you'll have sodium and calcium that will come into the cell, and chloride will be driven out of the cell. So you have more positive charges coming in and a bunch of negative charges leaving, So this is going to cause an action potential, and that will depolarize the cell. Action potential will be sent through the neuron and give us our sense of smell. So that's smell. What about taste? How does that work? Well, if we look at our tongue, on our tongue we have these little bumps like this that protrude above the tongue, just slightly when you look at it with the naked eye, right? So this would be like the surface of the tongue right here, and you have these little bumps on the tongue. And in these little pockets that surround the bump is where you have your taste buds. And in those taste buds you have receptor cells, about 125 of them, I believe, that are the place where the physiology actually occurs for the sense of taste. So if we blow these taste buds up to look at the cells and what's happening, we're going to look at a few different flavors, if you will, or senses of taste. Actually, let me make this a little bit bigger. So we're going to have three different pathways. So the first is going to be, let's do salty, then sour, and then sweet, bitter, and umami. I love saying that. So for our salty and sour are pretty similar pathways. So I'm just going to draw them out. So we have our epithelial sodium channel, so ENaC for short. That's this channel here. And some sort of ligand from something we eat that's salty is going to bind to this channel, open it, and you'll have all this sodium that will rush into the cell. And we know that when we have high amounts of sodium coming into the cell, that will depolarize the cell, causing a Buang, right? And then we have another channel. This is going to be a calcium channel. And that Buang is going to cause this calcium channel to open. Here comes all the calcium. Whoops. And then we have these vesicles that are along here. And when you have all this calcium rush in, that will allow these vesicles to release neurotransmitters from the taste bud cells, come onto the neuron and send a message to the brain that this is a salty flavor. Now, if we're dealing with sour, we still have this epithelial sodium channel. Here, we have some sort of ligand that binds here, telling that membrane receptor or channel that this is sour. So again, you'll have sodium rush in the shell. No, sorry, not sodium. This time we're looking at hydrogen, right? Let me think for a sec. Yeah, so we have hydrogen coming into the cell. And when you have a bunch of hydrogen come to the cell, on these taste bud cells, you have also potassium channels here. And all this hydrogen is going to close the potassium channel, so stop potassium from leaving the channel. So you have these positive hydrogens in here, buildup of potassium in here, causing a Wang, which will then open this calcium channel, allowing calcium in, and the cycle repeats itself with these vesicles full of neurotransmitters being released, telling this neuron here that, hey, this flavor is sour. Whatever you're eating, sour. Then our third pathway with these taste bud cells is for things that are sweet, bitter, and the flavor of umami. And let me see. I don't want to draw this. Here you're going to have a G protein. And you're going to have some sort of ligand that will bind to it. And that ligand, it depends. If it's sweet, it's going to be a carbohydrate of some sort. If it's bitter, it's going to be a quinone. And if it's umami, it'll be glutamate. So when that ligand binds here, send off an alpha subunit to activate phospholipase. And that enzyme will release increased amounts of IP3. And these increased amounts of IP3 will open calcium channels in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum of the cell. So you have all this calcium coming out of the cell. And when we have a lot of calcium in the cytoplasm, we know that that means these vesicles full of these neurotransmitters are going to get released. Causing an action potential on the neuron, telling the brain that this flavor is either sweet, bitter, or umami. That's what you're sensing in the taste bud. Let's see, did I miss anything there? I think that's it. Okay, so we've talked about smell, the physiology of that, and also taste. What about light and the eye? How do we see? How do we focus light? Particularly is what we'll discuss next. So let me go ahead and kind of draw an eyeball the best I can here. Oh man, that's not quite right. Let's try this. Oh, look at that. That circle is right there on par with Brother Hunt's circles, or even Brother Shaw's now. No, but in all seriousness, let's draw this eyeball. Ooh, let's see. Dang it. All right, well, do the best we can here. Okay. Excuse my strange looking eyeball here, but here's our cornea right here. Here's our lens here. Suspensory ligaments here. And then you'd have kind of your ciliary muscle. Here. So when you're looking at an object, okay, light's going to come into the eye. And we have to think about how do we perceive that? How do we focus this light into the eye to be able to perceive these objects? So light will come to the eye, hit the cornea, and then hit the lens. Okay. And this lens is something that can be controlled because of the ciliary muscle. So what do I mean by that? Well, this lens, okay, if we're looking at it from the anterior position, from anterior to posterior, it would look more like this, right? We have our lens, and then we have our suspensory ligaments, okay? And then we have our ciliary muscle. And what happens is, when this ciliary muscle is relaxed, that causes these suspensory ligaments here to actually become taut. Because if this muscle relaxes, it's moving this way, which is also pulling the suspensory ligaments with it. And so they actually become rather straightened like this. And the same thing would happen on the bottom, which would actually cause the lens to stretch. So if the ciliary muscle is relaxed, the suspensory ligaments will be taut. Is that how you spell it? Or is it like taut? I don't know. They're going to be tightened. And then that will cause the lens to stretch and become concave, like such, which will bend light less. And this is better for objects that are a farther distance away. Now, if you have a object that's closer to the eye, you're going to need to bend light more to focus the light on that object. And so, what will the ciliary muscle do? It's actually going to come inward. It's going to contract, and that's going to cause the suspensory ligaments. So ciliary muscle contracts, suspensory ligament loosens, becomes slack, like in this picture here. And when that happens, our lens is going to it's going to be convex. It's going to kind of bulge out, I guess you would say. So convex. And it's going to look more like this, like an almond almost. And that is going to bend light more. And so that is what we want when we have an object that's closer. So that's focusing light. And then, of course, you have your light that will come back here to the retina and will hit photoreceptors. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Photoreceptors converting light into electrical energy. And center and surround photoreceptors. So this is where the magic happens. This is where all the fun is. So when that light hits the retina back here on the photoreceptors, we have different types of cells that I'll explain here. So first of all, we have our photoreceptors, also referred to as rods and cones. Please excuse the movie in the background. My little nephews and niece are watching who knows what with their dad. So, let's see. Yeah, hopefully you can't hear it, but if you can, I apologize. All right, so you have your photoreceptors right here, right? Also known as rods and cones. And then you have your bipolar cell. And you have your neuron, okay? So what's going to happen is we're going to have this pathway that will change depending on if it's light or if it's dark. So on these photoreceptors, we start with a G protein known as GPCR. And this G protein is going to have a chemical structure known as 11-cis-retinol. And I'm actually going to kind of blow this up for you a little bit here so you can kind of see this a little better. So let me see here. Oof. Let's see if this feature will work. Nope. Hold on 1 second. All right. So this is going to just come here like this. So you have a double bond on this 11-cis-retinol. And when light hits this, it's going to cause a conformational change, which will turn it to 11-trans-retinol. So it's going to straighten out like this with light. And when light hits this 11-cis-retinol, turning it to 11-trans-retinol, it's going to kick off an alpha subunit, right? I'll put that right here. So it's going to kick off this alpha subunit, and you're going to have an enzyme here, abbreviated as PDE. I believe that's like phosphodiesterase. And that alpha is going to come over here and it's going to activate it. Now, when PDE is activated, there's a cation channel here where cyclic GMP is bound to. And cyclic GMP allows this cation channel to be open. But PDE, this enzyme, when it's active, it's going to come and snip off that's the cyclic portion of this, making it just GMP, which will close the channel. So PDE, active PDE, closes this channel. So if you have no cations coming into this channel, then you have no Bong going throughout the channel. And if that's the case, you have a calcium channel here that is not being opened. And if that calcium channel cannot open, then these vesicles that are along these photoreceptors, they cannot be released into the cleft between the photoreceptor and the bipolar cell. If glutamate, so light therefore means little to no glutamate being released from the photoreceptors. And if that's the case, then this membrane here that is in the bipolar cell, known as mGluR6, will not be activated. And if mGluR6 is not activated, then this channel up here, known as TRMP, no, TRPM, I think. TRPM1 will stay open because mGluR6, the job of mGluR6 is to deactivate or close this TRPM1 channel. So if no glutamate is coming here to activate mGluR6, TRPM1 is going to stay open. And if TRPM1, TRPM1 is open, you're going to have sodium coming into the cell, causing a Bong, which is going to open calcium channels. Those calcium channels, we know that if calcium is coming into the cell, okay, then these vesicles are going to release glutamate. And if glutamate is released from the bipolar cell, so again, light, low glutamate here, but high glutamate release here, that glutamate is going to bind to the AMPA channels, or AMPA receptors on the neuron, which are going to open them, allowing sodium into the neuron. And when we have high amounts of sodium coming into the neuron, action potentials are created, and these action potentials are going to tell the brain that that we're perceiving light, which makes sense because here light hit this 11-cis-retinol and cause this whole chain of events to cause the neuron to say, hey, there's light. Now, what if it's dark? How does this look? Well, if it's dark, we will not have 11-trans-retinol, or 11-cis-retinol is going to stay in this conformation. So we won't have 11-trans, If we don't have 11 trans, then we don't have the alpha subunit being kicked off. It's going to stay there. And if that's the case, now PDE is not going to be activated, which means that this cyclic GMP channel is open, allowing cations in. So let's say we have a bunch of sodium coming in here, causing this Wong, which is going to cause calcium to be open. And if calcium is open, what does that mean for these vesicles? That means we have high amounts of glutamate being released. So now it's high glutamate instead of low. If that's the case, this glutamate is going to be binding to mGluR6, which is going to activate it, which is going to cause the TRPM1 channel to actually close. Sorry, out of business. And if that happens, this calcium channel is also closed. And if there's no calcium coming in to help these vesicles out, whoops. Then these vesicles are hanging out here with their glutamate in them, but they're not being released. So that means low glutamate here now instead of high. And if there's no glutamate to bind to the AMPA receptor, the AMPA channel, then it's closed. And what does that mean? No action potential here in the neuron, which is telling the brain, hey, there's no light. Which again makes sense because beginning with in the GPCR protein, that 11-cis retinol is not being converted. So that's the pathway of converting light into electrical energy from these photoreceptors to these neurons that travel to the brain. But we also have to address the different types of photoreceptors. So we have center and surrounds. By the way, I hope you can hear me. This whole time I've been using my headphones for my microphone. Hopefully you can hear me. If not, this will be a bunch of drawings that you can follow without my voice. But anyway, so the types of photoreceptors. So we have, excuse me. We have on center and off center photoreceptors. So what's the difference? Well, that's a great question. And we will actually, let me think. Maybe I can just use this. Oh my goodness gracious. So this is what actually makes these photoreceptors a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So I just want to leave this here for a second to show you that the difference between an on-center or off-center photoreceptor is right here. Okay. So this photoreceptor, okay, would be considered an on-center photoreceptor. Why? Because it has mGluR6. So if mGluR6 is in the bipolar cell, it's referred to as on-center. Now, if this channel were instead AMPA, because with these photoreceptors, in the bipolar cell, 50% are mGluR6. The other 50% have just AMPA channels. And if this were AMPA instead, it would be off-center rather than on-center. So that's the difference. That's how we tell. But this off-center and on-center doesn't matter until we get to the bipolar cell. So everything else that happens here with the rods and cones is just all the same, whether it's on-center or off-center. It only matters once we get here. So let me illustrate this a little bit differently for you. Okay, let's say we have, I'm going to draw kind of like these 3 rectangles, okay? So I'm going to put one here. Alright. Put my neuron down here. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. Maybe one day we'll learn the physiology of yawning. Okay, so here's my drawing. So there's some center photoreceptors, and then there's surround photoreceptors, okay? So what I've done is draw this middle one representing surround photoreceptors, and then the ones on the sides symbolizing or representing the surround ones, surround photoreceptors. So as we do this, let's keep in mind and remember that when light hits the photoreceptor, ultimately we have less glutamate being released. Okay? So light equals, actually, I'm going to draw this in blue. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to draw it in, whoops, let's see, teal. So light hitting photoreceptor means less glutamate being released from the photoreceptor. All right. So if it's dark, opposite, it means more glutamate. Okay? So let's take what we learned before and add another dimension to it to really understand how light is processed in the eye physiologically. So when we have light hit this photoreceptor, we know that ultimately means from this. Oh, by the way, the center center rods and cones are going to make up more of the photoreceptors, and the surround rods and cones will make up less of a percentage. So the center has more say, per se. So if light hits this, we have less glutamate coming from it. However, if you have on center, that means that your surround rods and cones are off. So on center, off surround, or you could have off center, on surround. And the name refers to what light ultimately does to the bipolar cell. So if light hits on center, actually I might make that really complicated if I try to explain it like that, so I'm going to just try to draw this out. So let's say we have mGluR6 over here. Okay. What does that tell us? Well, we just talked before. That tells us that this is on center. And if we have light, I'm just going to say we have light hitting all of these, what's going to happen? Well, on center, off surround. So, if light hits the photoreceptor, right? That means less glutamate from all of them. And up here at this level, it doesn't matter if it's on center or off center, it's all going to behave the same. So if we have less glutamate coming from here, oh, by the way, these surround rods and cones are connected with these horizontal cells that are in between. Those horizontal cells will communicate to the center cell. That will help contribute to what amount of glutamate is coming out of here to go to the bipolar cell. So we have less glutamate coming out of these, then that means that the AMPA channels here on these horizontal cells are, that one looks like it's mutated. Okay. AMPA. So less glutamate coming means that this AMPA channel is closed. And if AMPA is closed, then that means this horizontal cell is going to, let me think through this for a second. So if AMPA is closed, then that tells us that there's no GABA coming from the horizontal cell. And if there's no GABA, so GABA is actually going to inhibit glutamate coming out of this photoreceptor. Because what GABA does is it will open potassium leak channels and chloride leak channels, which means you have potassium coming out of the cell and you have chloride coming into the cell, which means your cell is hyperpolarizing, which means that these vesicles containing your glutamate are not going to be released because your calcium channel that will help to release them is voltage gated and will not open because it's hyperpolarized, meaning that the resting membrane potential is farther away from threshold. So, therefore, you're going to have little to no glutamate coming out of this photoreceptor, which means that mGluR6 will not be activated, which means that TRPM1 is going to be open, causing sodium to come in. Ultimately, calcium will come in also, release transmitters, and tell the brain, hey, there's light, sending action potentials to the brain. And then, of course, the other way around works as well. If you have no light hitting the surround, that means your AMPA is going to be receiving glutamate, which means GABA will be released, which means, oh yeah, I just realized that I explained what GABA does, but was at first saying that no GABA was released. So if no GABA is released, then these channels stay closed, calcium comes in, and will release glutamate. And then, of course, if you have mGluR6 here, it's on center, but if it's AMPA, then it's off center. And everything that happens up here is the same. You know, if light hits, then we'll have less glutamate coming out here. If dark hits more, and then if you have a lot of glutamate coming out here, then that means AMPA will open and give you action potential because sodium will be coming in. If you have little glutamate, then you won't have AMPA open. If you have off center, that means when light's hitting here, the photoreceptor, ultimately you have less glutamate coming out from the bipolar, but light hitting the surround will ultimately end up with greater glutamate coming out of the bipolar cell. So there you have it. That's how photoreceptors convert light into electrical energy, and the difference between on and off center and surrounds for photoreceptors. So that's been pretty fun so far. Okay. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the mechanisms of hearing, and this will wrap up our video today. I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible for you. So here we have our ear, and we're going to have sound waves that will come into the ear, okay, and it will travel into the auditory duct. I'm going to abbreviate as AD, and this auditory duct is going to eventually run into this tympanic membrane. And when these sound waves travel through the auditory duct and hit this tympanic membrane, it's going to cause the tympanic membrane to flex, to vibrate. And that will cause these bones in the inner ear here to amplify their movement. So first we have the malleus, I'm just going to abbreviate as M, and the incus right here, which I'll abbreviate as I, and then the stapes bone, which I'll abbreviate as S. And when this tympanic membrane is moving, that's causing these bones to move. and it causes this stapes to act almost like a piston in a cylinder of a car, as it pushes into the bony labyrinth and causes further vibration into the cochlea. And then there's this round or oval window beneath it that's a membrane that flexes because you have this pressure that's coming in here, and the flexing of that membrane allows all that vibration and pressure to come in there without causing damage. It just kind of moves back and forth to relieve some of that pressure. So coming into the cochlea here, just going to draw it like this. All right. So up top here, we have scala vestibuli, just kind of a channel in the cochlea where those sound waves will eventually enter first. And then on its return back down, we have, so like we're coming in here this way, and then coming out here this way, and this is going to be the scala tympani. And then this membrane right here, this third kind of like channel here, is just the cochlear membrane. So how does this work exactly? Well, if we were to take a cross section of this, right, and just kind of look at it straight on, what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and draw that down here. So let me just draw it like this. Okay. So we've got, let me see, I'm just going to divide this up like this. So we have scala vestibuli here, scala tympani here. These act as the ECF, and then your cochlear membrane here. And let's draw some. Oh, okay. Now here in the cochlear membrane. No, I think it's the cochlear duct. Is it the membrane or the duct? Well, either way, essentially what we've got going on here is there's a membrane here, okay, called the Reisner's membrane. And then we have down here what we call our basilar membrane, which is very important. And this area here is collectively referred to as the organ of Corti. And use blue. This structure, tectoral membrane, I think I got that right. And then you have your hair cells that are here. You have kind of like 3 outer and 1 inner. And so what happens is you have these vibrations, right? So you have like these sound waves coming in the auditory duct, hitting to the tympanic membrane, and then transferring that energy into the cochlea, and you have these vibrations. Let me use orange or purple. That's better. These vibrations that are coming through this liquid, right? And when that happens, that's causing this Reisner's membrane to kind of flex up and down. And as that happens, then you have that energy that's transferred, right? And it causes the basilar membrane to also flex up and down. And then you have this vibrations that are exiting through the scala tympani. But when you have this kind of path happening, these vibrations of these membranes flexing up and down, that is going to cause these hair cells to push up and down against the tectoral membrane here, okay? And why do we care about that? Why is that important? Well, these cells have these little like hair fibers on the ends, and those hair fibers, okay, they contain mechanically gated potassium channels, and when they push up against the tectoral membrane, they kind of flex, they stretch. Because it's mechanically gated, it causes that potassium channel to open. See if I can kind of draw this out for you. So you have this potassium channel, right? And as these push up against the tympanic membrane, stretch, it flexes them, and potassium is going to actually come into the cell, and that will cause the cell to depolarize, and it's going to open calcium channels. And we know what happens when we get lots of calcium in the cell. We have glutamate released from these vesicles, right, onto the auditory neuron. And that's going to cause an action potential sent to the brain, telling the brain, hey, we're getting some vibration here. We're hearing these sounds. And I think my headphones are about to die, but I just want to say before I go that we also have higher vibrations, so higher hertz, like 20,000 hertz, that are experienced in the earlier portion of the cochlea, and towards the end, closer to the apex, we have the lower vibration, about 2,000 hertz, that are being detected there. And that is the mechanisms of hearing and some physiology behind it. So, hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully I explained things decently, clearly, and without too much confusion. Thanks for watching.